You're about to make a catastrophic mistake. Right now. Today. Probably within the next few hours. Someone is going to ask you to do something. It feels harmless. Maybe even noble. You're going to want to say yes. Because saying yes makes you feel like a good person. And that single yes is going to cost you in ways you won't recognize until it's too late. Here's what nobody tells you. There are 5 specific things that once you do them for someone, fundamentally alter the power dynamic between you in ways you can never fully reverse. These aren't small favors. These aren't acts of kindness. These are transfers of power, disguised as generosity. And the moment you complete them, you've permanently weakened your position while strengthening theirs. Niccolò Machiavelli, the Florentine strategist who decoded political survival in the 1500s, spent decades watching people destroy themselves, doing exactly these 5 things. Not because they were stupid, not because they were weak, but because they didn't understand the irreversible nature of what they were doing. They thought they were being helpful. They were actually giving away leverage they could never get back. And once that leverage was gone, the relationship transformed from equal partnership to subtle domination, with them on the losing end. Now, before I show you the 5 things you must never do for anyone, not your boss, not your friends, not your family, not your romantic partner, I need you to understand the psychological mechanism that makes these 5 things so dangerous. It's not that they're inherently bad acts. It's that they create dependency, obligation, and power asymmetry that cannot be undone. Once you've done them, the other person's expectations have permanently shifted. They now view you as someone who provides this thing, and attempting to stop providing it feels like you're withdrawing something that belongs to them.
Watch how this operates in any relationship where power dynamics have shifted. The person who always pays starts to be expected to always pay. The person who always solves problems becomes responsible for solving all problems. The person who always accommodates becomes the one who must always accommodate. If you're ready to see the brutal architecture behind relationships that drain you, stay with me through all 5. Because these patterns don't develop through explicit negotiation, their mind absolving themselves of the debt entirely. Here's the toxic part. You think lending money is an act of generosity. It's not. It's the transfer of a relationship from equal footing to hierarchical structure. The moment cash changes hands, you're no longer friends. You're creditor and debtor. Every interaction from that point forward is poisoned. Watch how this plays out in real time. You lend a friend money. They promise 3 months. 3 months pass. No payment, no mention. You don't want to be that person who brings it up, so you stay silent. But now every interaction is contaminated. Every time they buy something, you're calculating. Every time they suggest an expensive dinner, you're thinking, pay me back first. Meanwhile, they know you're thinking this, so they start avoiding you. Because seeing you reminds them of their failure. Or worse, they get defensive. They convince themselves you don't actually need the money. After all, you were able to lend it in the first place, right? So in their mind, the loan becomes a gift, and you become the villain for expecting it back. Here's what people don't understand. Even if the money gets repaid, the damage is permanent. The relationship has been rewritten at the foundational level. You've seen them in a position of weakness. They've experienced you as someone who holds power over them. That dynamic never fully resets. This is why lending money doesn't just risk the money. It guarantees the destruction of the relationship itself.
But here's what makes the second mistake even more insidious. Because at least with money, people know there's a risk. The next one? People do it thinking they're being noble. The relationship is now permanently corrupted. If they never pay you back, you've lost money and respect for them. If they do pay you back, the relationship still carries the residue of the period where they owed you. Either way, the easy equality you had before the loan is gone forever. Machiavelli watched this pattern destroy alliances between princes who lent money to other princes. The debtor prince always came to resent the creditor prince, because debt is humiliating. The creditor prince always came to view the debtor prince as unreliable or entitled. Even when debts were repaid, the alliances never fully recovered, because the power asymmetry of debt had revealed the relationship's transactional foundation. But here's the part that makes this truly toxic. Lending money doesn't just damage the relationship. It often doesn't even help the person you lent to. Someone in financial crisis who needs to borrow money from friends usually has deeper financial problems that a loan doesn't solve. You're funding continued dysfunction. They blow through your money, end up in the same situation months later. And now you're both worse off than if you'd refused initially. The only winning move is to never lend money to anyone you have an ongoing relationship with. If someone you care about needs money and you can afford to help, you have two options. Give them the money as a gift with absolutely no expectation of repayment, or refuse entirely. Giving as a gift means genuinely writing it off the moment you hand it over. If they never mention it again, you're fine with that. If they use it in ways you wouldn't approve, you're fine with that. If it doesn't solve their problem, you're fine with that.
You gave a gift. They received it. Transaction complete. Most people can't actually do this. They say they're giving a gift, but emotionally, they're still expecting repayment or proper use or gratitude. This creates all the same problems as lending without the explicit agreement that might actually result in repayment. It's the worst of both options. So the clean move, never lend money to anyone you have an ongoing relationship with. Not friends, not family, not romantic partners, not colleagues. The financial help you think you're providing isn't worth the permanent corruption of the relationship. And if you can't afford to gift the money with genuinely zero strings attached, it creates contempt and exploitation. Here's the psychological mechanism. Humans value scarcity and devalue abundance. This isn't morality, it's neurology. Your brain assesses worth based on availability. What's always there registers as worthless. What's rare registers as precious. Your time follows the same law. When you make yourself completely available, you're not communicating care. You're communicating you have nothing more important than whatever they want. Which means you're not important. You're always free when they call. Always adjusting your schedule to theirs. Always saying yes. Always dropping everything. What you think this signals, I value you. What it actually signals, I have no life, no priorities, no boundaries worth protecting. Watch what happens over time. They start calling with less and less regard for your schedule, because they've learned your schedule is infinitely flexible. They cancel on you without concern, because they've learned you'll always accommodate. They make demands on your time they'd never make on someone whose time they actually respected. And here's the really toxic part. They start resenting you for your availability. This seems backwards, but it's brutally consistent. When someone has complete access to something, two things happen. They take it for granted, and they feel pressured by its constant presence. Your always being there starts to feel like obligation, burden, a weight they have to manage. Machiavelli observed this in The Prince. Rulers who made themselves too accessible to their subjects lost respect. The king who was always available for every petition got overwhelmed with trivial demands, while being perceived as weak. But the king who controlled access, the colleague who always says yes, gets their time treated as worthless. The colleague who's selective gets their time treated as gold. This is the scarcity principle in action. What's abundant loses value. What's rare gains power.
This applies even in intimate relationships. The romantic partner with no independent life becomes suffocating. The partner who maintains their own world remains desirable. So you must protect the scarcity of your time, not as manipulation, as genuine boundaries. You're not always free because you have a life beyond any single relationship. You're available when you genuinely want to be, not whenever someone demands it. The result? The time you do give becomes valuable because it's not infinite, and you maintain your own identity instead of dissolving into complete availability for someone else. Now, point number 3. This is where most people destroy themselves without realizing it. Never take full responsibility for someone else's problems. Listen carefully to this distinction. Helping someone is fine. Taking ownership of their problems is catastrophic. Here's the mechanism. Helping means you do something supportive while they maintain responsibility. Taking responsibility means you've made their problem yours. You're now responsible for the solution and the outcome. This seems like a subtle difference. It's not. It's the difference between supporting someone and crippling them.
When you take ownership of someone's problem, you trigger learned helplessness. They stop solving it because you're solving it. Their brain adapts. They become dependent. And here's the toxic part. When you inevitably can't solve their problem perfectly, they resent you. You've taken responsibility, so now the failure is yours. Not theirs, yours. Watch how this plays out in real relationships. Someone close to you has a problem. Financial crisis, relationship collapse, career meltdown. You step in, reasonable at first. Advice, support, maybe some direct help. But then, they don't fix it. So you get more involved. You start doing more. You start feeling responsible for solving this for them. That's the moment you cross the line, from helping to owning. Once you've taken responsibility, 4 toxic things trigger immediately. First, they stop taking responsibility. Why would they when you've already claimed it? Your involvement just reduced their motivation to solve their own problem. You're handling it now. Second, you can't actually solve it. It's their problem. Embedded in their life, their choices, their patterns. You can influence, but you can't fix, because you don't control the variables. You've taken responsibility for something you cannot deliver. Third, when the problem persists despite your effort, you get blamed, either directly or through their resentment. You took responsibility. Problem's still here. Therefore, you failed. Never mind, it was never yours to begin with. Fourth, even if you somehow solve this one, you've established a pattern. The next problem arrives. They come to you. You're now the designated solver for their entire life. Enormous burden. Zero reward. Machiavelli watched advisors destroy themselves exactly this way. The prince has a problem. The advisor takes responsibility. Either it doesn't get solved and the advisor gets blamed, or it does get solved, and now the advisor owns every future problem. Either path converts you from valued counsel to responsible servant. The parent who takes responsibility for their adult child's chaos creates a permanent dependent. The friend who manages another's relationship drama gets trapped in endless cycles, while the actual relationship never heals. The manager who owns their team's problems, you can support, you can provide resources. You cannot make their problem yours. This requires brutal discipline, because watching someone you care about struggle is psychologically torturous. Your instinct screams at you to step in, to fix it, to rescue them. But that instinct will destroy you. You'll end up responsible for outcomes you cannot control, in situations you do not own. Instead, you help them build capacity to solve their own problems. You don't solve it for them. You help them solve it themselves. You provide support, not rescue. And you maintain the boundary that their problems are theirs, even when you care deeply about the outcome. Number 4. Never defend someone when they're clearly wrong. This seems disloyal. It feels like you're abandoning them. But defending someone who's obviously in the wrong is the fastest way to destroy both your credibility and the relationship itself. Here's what actually happens. First, you damage your own credibility. Everyone can see they're wrong. When you defend them anyway, you look either dishonest or blind. Either you know they're wrong and you're lying, or you can't see they're wrong, which means your judgment is compromised. Either way, your credibility takes the hit. Second, you enable their continued bad behavior. If everyone confronts them, but you defend them, you've given them cover. They don't have to examine their behavior. You've provided the support they need to keep doing the wrong thing, because at least someone is on their side. Third, and this is where it gets toxic, you create moral obligation. Once you defend them when they're slightly wrong,
Consistency. Pressure locks you in. Now you have to defend them when they're very wrong. You get trapped in a pattern of defense that escalates with their behavior until you're defending the indefensible. Number 5. Never sacrifice your core interests for their benefit. This is the most important rule, and the one that will destroy you fastest if you break it. Not your career for their convenience, not your financial security for their comfort, not your values for their approval, not your well-being for their preferences. Here's what most people don't understand. You've been taught that sacrifice for others is the highest virtue, that putting someone else first proves how much you care. It's a trap, because sacrifice only works when it comes from surplus. When you sacrifice from your core needs, you create resentment, depletion, and the eventual collapse of everything. Here's the mechanism. Initially, it feels noble. You're being selfless. You're showing love through action. This feels good because you've been conditioned to associate self-sacrifice with virtue. But watch what you just did. You established a precedent. A precedent that your fundamental interests are negotiable. That when their preferences conflict with your survival loses. And here's the toxic part most people miss. They learn this pattern, not consciously, but they learn that your boundaries are movable, that your needs can be postponed, that pressure works. Research on relationship dynamics shows this clearly. When one person consistently sacrifices core interests, the other person's requests escalate over time, not because they're evil, but because you trained them that this is how the relationship works. You taught them that your limits aren't real. And now you're caught in a pattern where you can be generous from surplus. You cannot sacrifice from necessity. That distinction determines whether your relationships survive or collapse. Your core interests are your physical health, your mental stability, your financial security, your career trajectory, your foundational values, your essential relationships. These are non-negotiable. You protect these first, always, with everyone. From the surplus beyond these protected zones, you can be as generous as you want. You can help, you can sacrifice, you can give freely. But the core stays untouched.
I will not take
Someone
this
needs money, you help from your surplus, never from your rent fund, never from your emergency reserve, never from the capital you need to survive the next crisis. Someone needs your time, you give from hours you control, not from sleep you need to function, not from the focused work that builds your future, not from the recovery time that keeps you sane. This sounds selfish to people who've been trained to destroy themselves for others. It's not. It's the only way to build relationships that don't rot from the inside. Because here's what actually happens when you violate your core interests for someone. You deplete. Your energy drops. Your resentment builds. Your effectiveness crashes. You become bitter, exhausted, hollow. And the relationship doesn't grow stronger through your sacrifice. It corrupts. You start tallying every compromise. You begin resenting them for needs they didn't even demand you meet. You poison the dynamic with unspoken scorekeeping. The bond dies slowly, strangled by your self-inflicted depletion. But when you protect your core first, something different happens. You give from genuine abundance instead of forced obligation. Your generosity comes from strength, not from guilt. Your help actually helps because you're not collapsing while you provide it. The relationship improves because you're operating from surplus, not from survival mode. They receive your best, not your resentful scraps.
These 5 principles Machiavelli observed in the political sphere translate directly into every relationship you'll ever have. Never lend money. Never make yourself completely available. Never take responsibility for their problems. Never defend them when they're clearly wrong. Never sacrifice your core interests for their benefit. These boundaries seem harsh until you understand that maintaining them is what makes genuine relationship possible. The person who violates all 5 of these boundaries ends up depleted, resentful, and disrespected. The person who maintains these boundaries creates relationships based on mutual respect, reciprocity, and genuine choice rather than obligation. Here's what most people miss. When you sacrifice your health, your finances, your career, your values to save someone else, you're not just losing those things. You're losing the ability to help anyone at all when it actually matters. You become the person everyone takes from, but no one respects. Machiavelli understood this 5 centuries ago. Some things you never do for anyone. Not because you don't care, but because doing them destroys both you and the relationship. The strongest bonds are built on boundaries, not sacrifice. On mutual sovereignty, not emotional hostage-taking. Protect these boundaries ruthlessly. Your dignity depends on it. Your relationships depend on it. Your life depends on it. So here's the question I'll leave you with. Which of these 5 boundaries have you already violated? And what's it cost you? Drop your answer in the comments. Most people won't have the courage to admit it, but you're not most people anymore. This is Inner Compass. Navigate by your own true north.